What's going on, everybody? It's ShamefulPenguin here, back with another video. Today I'm going to be going over my Ice Pop Blade Vortex Assassin build. I've been playing this league in Heist 3.12. This build is excellent at Heist, has pretty good movement speed. It's a medium-ish budget. I wouldn't really recommend it as a league start, but you definitely can turn a generic Blade Vortex league start into this very easily if you go Assassin. This build does not clear screens as well as the Fire Blade Vortex variant, but it is much cheaper to make it work. It is much more defensive, and it can clear all content in the game, no problem. It just kind of depends on how much you're willing to spend on the build. The main point of this build is that we are scaling power charges to our damage, so we are using the Void Battery for our damage. As our wand, we're going low life, so we use Prism Guardian, and then we're also using a Chevron's Wrappings because we are low life. And those are the three main premises of a build. Those are the three most important items to get for this build, but the rest of the items can be added on afterwards. Just make sure in your budget you can afford those three items, and if you can afford those three items, you can get this build to work excellent. Herald of Ice is probably my favorite Herald skill because of the noise it makes, and just like the fact that it like chains to every enemy. I really enjoy this Herald, so I make a lot of my builds around Herald of Ice. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but this build is really strong. It's much stronger actually than the double Void Battery builds. Those builds are much better at clearing maps. They can just jam through because they have like Headhunter or Inspired Learning, and they can do just like ramp through the map. But this build is much more defensive. You don't really ever get one shot. You can kill Awakener 8 Cyrus with this build. There's a lot of things you can do with this build on top of still being really fast at maps. So if you're interested in an all-arounder build, this is the one I recommend. But if you're more interested in like, I'm never going to kill a boss again kind of mentality, then you're going to want to use like double Void Battery, Headhunter, and stuff like that, and you'll clear much faster. But this build has room to improve on what I've done. A Badge of the Brotherhood would make this build go like through the roof in damage, but that is probably one of the most expensive items in the game right now, so I don't really use it because of the it would make it much more difficult for you guys to try to mimic this build. So I like to use a little bit cheaper of items. That's why I went with the amulet that I did. So yeah, this build's really good. I hope you guys enjoy the look of this build. I have some MTXs on Celestial Herald, so that's what you guys are seeing on the pops if you're interested. And yeah, we're gonna get into the build, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of it. So I'm gonna be going over the gearing section of this build. I'm gonna be recommending the most important items, and then I'm kind of gonna go down the list in priority of what you should prioritize in buying for this build. So the most important items to buy are Chevron's Wrappings, a Prism Guardian, and a Void Battery. They're all kind of equal. Maybe Void Battery because usually it can be a little cheaper. Same with Prism Guardian. Chevron's, try to get it as a 6-link, and if you can't, obviously 5-link. Do what you can for your build. But before you're using these items, they're all kind of a high level to use. So I recommend you just going hybrid. Don't worry about going CI. Just kind of level up as a hybrid character. It's not that. I just did hybrid other than converting the CI, then converting over. It was a pretty smooth transition. So just try to grind as fast as you can until you can hit that level. Then you're gonna pop off. So Void Battery is excellent for our build because it scales off power charges. We're assassins, so we get a ton of power charges. So the more power charges we get, the more spell damage we get, all on top of scaling our crit and everything. We do this because the premise of me making this build is I wanted a Herald of Ice to do a lot of damage because I just really enjoy Herald of Ice. You guys have probably heard me say that already. But if we have a bunch of power charges, those power charges are increasing the damage of our Herald of Ice. So just like all our damage is increased by power charges. So Void Battery is really good. Dual-wielding Void Batteries are also really good, but you can't go low life if you're dual-wielding. Well, you can, but I don't recommend it. You're losing a lot of benefits if you change a not use a Prism Guardian. So I highly recommend using this variant if you want the defensive variant. But if you're thinking about going double Void Battery, try to follow someone else's build, or use my old build that I used in 3.8, I believe it is. That video, I'll link it somewhere down in the description if you want to use double void battery. Anyways, let's get into the rest of the gear. So next most important after those 3 items, Circle of Fear. Try to get at least cold damage or buff effect on it. Mana Reservation is not important. I just got it because it was cheap, and it made it so when I was making this build, if I ended up actually needing it, I had one in the back. I don't actually need it, so we're good. Presence of Triula. This makes it so our chaos resistance is not terrible, so we don't get one shot by chaos damage, and this also gives us a crazy amount of ES. Next most important, I guess they're all kind of tied. We're just using a rare helmet, rare gloves, rare ring, rare belt, and then we're using Sintrek, but honestly you could use rare boots if you have to. I'm using Sintrek because it's just 30% movement speed, decent amount of energy shield, and it gives us dex. Meeting your dex requirement is a little iffy on this build if you don't get it on any of your rare things, so getting a Sintrek can just like fix that for you, so it's pretty nice. Helmet +1 to maximum number of seals is really good. I don't actually have one on, so I'm gonna put an infographic on the screen, whatever. On your gloves, you're gonna need just look for good ES and good resistance, but you're also going to want to craft physical converted to cold. This is really helpful. There's a lot of extra damage for our build because Blade Vortex is a physical, so we're converting it to cold and then scaling the cold damage. Main idea of the build. You just want to get most ES as possible. You could also, if you don't need resistance, you can go with a Bated Breath. Works out just as well. As for your flasks, a Rumies, Edziri's, and a Wise Oak is what I went with. These are all excellent choices, pretty budget, meeting my requirements for not being a crazy budget, but not being like super cheap. And then on top of that, getting Quicksilver and a Diamond Flask with Staunching and Flask of Heat for freeze immunity. Excellent choice, and that's what you're going to want to go with for your build, for your gear. And now that we've talked about the gear, we're going to get into the gem links. So the gem links are pretty standard as I'm going to go across them. So Blade Vortex, you want to get your Vol Blade Vortex because the Vol skill is just so good. So I recommend trying to get a Vol Blade Vortex and then level up on your offhand other Blade Vortexes so you can slam them later to maybe get a level 21 Vol Blade Vortex and stuff like that. So those are good options. And we have some options for what we want to link to it. So I recommend using Inspiration, Unleash, Controlled Destruction, and Hypothermia as your 5 links. So you're going to go Blade Vortex, Inspiration, Unleash, Controlled, Hypothermia. Those are your 5 links. Your 6th link is going to be a Power Charge on crit. You could also put Increased AoE or Conk Effect. Those are your 3 options for your 6th link. I like Power Charge on crit because it gives us a good amount of damage, but it doesn't kill our AoE. Because I was running with Conk Effect while mapping, and it didn't feel as smooth because it just, not all the blades were ticking on the enemy, so I didn't get that like nice one-shot pop all the time. Because we had the damage, and then the Ink AoE, if you run like a Juice tier 16 map, sometimes the Ink AoE just like doesn't help us with our damage. You can also use Intensify. I used Intensify in my previous build, but I opted not to go with Intensify this time. I wanted to go with Power Charge and crit because there's just more average damage. But Intensify is also a great option as your 6th link. I recommend trying out all 4 of them. And if you want to just never gem swap, just use Power Charge and crit. And if you want to be a min-maxer, use Ink AoE and Conk Effect as your swaps, and or you can use Unleash. So those are the options for your 6th link on your Blade Vortex. And pretty standard. If you guys have any questions about why I chose a certain gem link, go ahead and ask me down below. More than ready to answer any of those questions. Next I'm going to get into the Herald of Ice setup. So our Herald of Ice is linked to increased AoE, Frostbite, and Hex Touch. So this is something I've changed since a few times in my build. Originally I had Herald of Ice, Ink AoE, increased crit, and what was the last one? Increased crit, and I forgot what the last one was, but that made it so the Herald of Ice pops did more damage. It was really nice. But after testing through numerous amount of maps, I figured that Hex Touch and Frostbite gives us more damage with our Herald of Ice, and it just like it curses every enemy after the first one you touch. So it just makes like the chain reaction stronger, but it makes your overall DPS like not as strong. But I enjoyed it a lot. If you're thinking about taking this build and like I'm gonna farm bosses a lot, I recommend taking off Herald of Hex Touch and Frostbite and slotting it into a Wave of Conviction, because this will allow us to be able to use our cold exposure from the Wave of Conviction on top of Hex Touch and Frostbite, giving that Frostbite effect. So that's going to be more damage for our bosses. But if you're lazy, it really, like I've killed Cyrus with just this setup, this mapping setup, even with power charge and crit, no conk effect, and it's still like easy-ish fight. So I wouldn't really have to worry about it unless you're like really worried about killing him fast. So now we're gonna get into our we'll do our auras, because I think that's the next most important part because we're low life. So on our Prism Guardian, make sure this is on your Prism Guardian because it gives us blood magic, using Hatred, Zealotry, and Anger. So I used Anger because I was playing with a lot of different auras. I originally had Skitterbots here because they chill and shock enemies, so that was more damage. But I figured after testing and playing with PoB a lot, Anger actually adds more DPS, even more than Wrath. So I just opted to slot in Anger, and it's been helping with our DPS a decent amount. Yes, it does add fire damage. It doesn't contribute to the pops or anything, but it just added some good flat DPS that this build could use. So I ended up going with that. You can slot in Skitterbots or Wrath or something else in here, but with my exact build on PoB and all my testing, Anger added the most DPS. So if you guys are opting to change that, then go ahead. Just make sure you check your DPS and if it's actually like what you want it to be. Our other auras are Discipline, Flesh and Stone, Vitality, and then I have an Enlighten support on there. It's only level 2. You can get a level 4 one on here, no problem, and then you have a lot more mana. So you could probably like, if you have issues reserving mana and you don't have a mana reserved Circle of Fear, it might be because of the Enlighten. So make sure you get a level 2 Enlighten. But you want around 100 mana for this build because it's really easy to use up all your mana. As you can see, you get pretty low. If I hold it on cooldown, I actually end up using all my mana. So, which is not important because it's a duration skill. But anyways, if you guys have like mana problems, either get a new ring or make sure you have an Enlighten that's leveled up on here. Those are your two options to fix that, and it's pretty simple for low life figuring things out. So yeah, those are pretty standard. So Vitality. So many of you probably have a question that are newer to the game or newer to figuring out low life. Why Vitality? So Vitality gives us flat life per second, and as you can see, we're Energy Shield. But we grab over here Zealot's Oath, so it turns life regen into Energy Shield. So we just flat out get this much, like that number of regen per second. And level up the Vitality as much as is comfortable. I would like to get this to 20 eventually. I'm not meeting the strength requirement, but I can easily meet the strength requirement, but I want to get my Enlighten to level 3 or 4 before I do that. But having a higher level of Vitality just gives you more defenses, so I highly recommend just tuning whatever level Vitality you can use. Next option is our movement skills: Flame Dash, Withering Step, Second Wind, and then we have a Righteous Fire. Doesn't need to be linked to that, but Second Wind, Flame Dash, and Withering Step is pretty good because we can like dash around, and then we tap Withering Step to just get movement speed and can still dash around. Just makes clearing a lot faster and a lot smoother, especially using Withering Step or Phase Run if you really prefer Phase Run. It makes us have phasing, so we can like walk through enemies. So when we're in heist and you know that you get that big mob of enemies, you can just walk straight through them. So it's actually really good to have Phase Run or Withering Step on for those situations. Righteous Fire, we only use the Vol Righteous Fire. We don't use regular Righteous Fire because we can't sustain it. But using the Vol Righteous Fire gives us a huge amount of spell damage when you pop it, so I recommend using that for the bosses. And lastly, we have our Immortal Call, Cast Damage Taken, Wave of Conviction setup. This is just for smooth gameplay and for mapping purposes. If you want to self-cast Wave of Conviction, go ahead. Just level up Wave of Conviction past what the Cast Damage Taken suggests or like allows, so then you can self-cast it. Go ahead and play around with that, but this just makes it so I don't have to press buttons. I literally just press Blade Vortex and I run around pressing Flame Dash and Withering Step, and everything dies. I don't have to worry about clicking things, so it's pretty fun in that sense, and really smooth for mapping. Alright, now we're going to be talking about the passive tree. Passive tree is pretty simple. We're just grabbing a lot of crit, a lot of power charges, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So we're doing a few fun things that I'll explain later. Grabbing a lot of ES, of course, but while leveling, I have a different POB. Well, it's the same POB, but in the bottom left corner you can change the tree. Make sure you look at that if you're leveling and confused about how to level, like what you should be speccing into while leveling. So while leveling, you're gonna want to grab Blood Siphon, Pro Preparation, Purity of Flesh, and Devotion. You want to grab this while leveling because scaling your life is a lot easier while leveling with leveling gear than scaling Energy Shield. Energy Shield scaling is only good if you have gear that has Energy Shield on it. So really don't worry about like copying exactly. If you have to use like 10 regrets after, which is what I did, it's a lot smoother to just be hybrid until you can be low life. It's a lot faster too, because then you can focus on just killing things, getting leveled on this build, and then once you hit that point, you just convert completely. So yeah, so while leveling, you're gonna want to grab a few different things. You're gonna ignore the power charge nodes until you hit some of the ascendancies. Yeah, just focus on getting these. And then once you become low life, you also want to grab Sovereignty. Don't grab this until you're low life, but once you hit low life, grab this because this allows us to equip more auras. Anything else that I should explain? Not really. Just check the POB if you're confused. Just follow it, the leveling version, and if you're confused on why you're not taking something or if you think you should be taking something, go ahead and message me. Anyways, now we're going to get into some of the jewels. I'm going to go over the unique jewels first. So we're using Energy from Within, pretty standard. Gives us more energy, maximum energy shield because it converts life into ES. We're using a Thread of Hope. We're using a medium ring. This is in order to grab Divine Wrath, Divine Judgment, Divine Fury. We are a physical spell. That's what Blade Vortex is. So converting that damage into other elements helps us do more damage, and it's just 5% fizz as extra, 5% fizz as extra. That's just a lot of bonus damage that we're getting on top of the 50%. So this is just a really good damage node to take. We also took Arcane Capacitor because now we get Arcane Surge from just killing enemies, so we don't have to worry about putting Arcane Surge on anything. Another unique jewel we're using is a Watcher's Eye, but really don't worry about, get this last after you've like gotten all the other things from the build. This is your last priority to copy me. It gives us a lot of damage, but it is kind of expensive because of the fizz to cold conversion. This is a slightly expensive jewel, not really crazy expensive, but if you can afford it, go ahead and buy it. It's a lot of damage. If you can't afford it, don't worry about it, just ignore it. And yeah, that's it for the unique jewels. Now we're going to go over the cluster jewels. So grab cluster jewels before you grab Watcher's Eye, obviously. So a large jewel with 8 passive skills. I grabbed Widespread and Sadist because it just helps with our damage, but a better choice would be grab to grab Blanketed Snow. That gives us cold penetration. That would be the best jewel to grab, or best large thing to grab. It's on a cold damage jewel, so make sure you look for that. But if you are copying me, just don't worry about it. Most of our damage comes from the medium cluster jewels anyways. And on our medium cluster jewels, what we're looking for is vast power and magnifier on both of them. This is because it gives us area damage, area of effect, area damage, area of effect, and crit multi. So this just scales our damage pretty well. And then lastly, I just got an onslaught jewel with ES and crit. Just mainly look for an onslaught jewel just because it makes our mapping a lot faster and a lot smoother. Other than that, I'm probably going to fit in a few regular rare jewels in the tree somewhere, probably spec these on my next 2 levels, and just look for energy shield, crit multi, crit damage, just that kind of stuff on your jewels. And that's pretty much it for the passive tree. Now let's get into the Ascendency. So the Ascendency, you're going to want to grab Unstable Infusion. This gives us power charge generation and an extra power charge. Then Deadly Infusion gives us crit multi per power charge, crit chance, and movement speed. So once you've grabbed Unstable Infusion and Deadly Infusion, then you can start grabbing power charge nodes on your tree. That's because just now we're scaling the power charges, whereas we just had them and they were wasted points pretty much. Next, I'd recommend grabbing Mistwalker as your third. This is because it gives us elusive, and it just gives us just better like evasion, more crit, and no extra damage from crit. It's just a better defensive buff. We have dodge now. Movement speed, so it's just a smooth skill that gives us more defenses, more mobility, and then lastly opportunistic, because it just gives us more damage, more crit damage, and some movement speed for mobility. You can take ambush and assassinate if you're like struggling on crit for whatever reason and it gives cooling strike, but I figured opportunistic was better than ambush for this case in this build. But if you're building differently, consider using ambush and assassinate. Try it out, check out the POBs, see the differences. But overall, those are the Ascendancies, and I think these are the best 4 for this exact build, so I recommend you guys copy those. As for the Anointments, this is what we're going to want to go with. Deflection, because it gives us more defense benefits, just makes us stronger, more survivability on this build. If you're interested in just being a zoom, go fast, good maps build, freedom of movement's really good. Also helps with heisting because you're just guaranteed to get phasing. Even though we're already getting elusive, getting phasing because the movement speed is really nice. And the chance to dodge while phasing, we're pretty much always going to be phasing if we have the option to. So that's going to be really strong to get if you're interested in going faster versus survivability. Other 2 options you can go with are Arcane Guarding. This gives us spell damage and more spell block, and this gives us more block, but also gives us avoid being stunned and avoid elemental ailments and a little bit of spell damage. These are your options. Those are your 4 options, but my highest 2 recommendations are deflection and freedom of movement. So as for the bandits, you're gonna want to go for Alira. I went for Alira because it gives us crit multi and the all res, so it's really nice. You can also go with 2 passive points. Later on you can switch to that if you can meet the res requirement pretty easily, but Alira just makes the game faster, smoother, and less to worry about, honestly. As for the Pantheon, I went with Arcali for the Major God. This is because it gives us recovery rate and chaos resistance against damage over time, really helpful. Also, Gar-Khan gives us movement speed for our Minor God, so that's a really good choice. I recommend going those 2 if you can, but Pantheons don't make or break your build in general, so don't worry about it. If you feel like one is going to help your build more, like if you're having issues with getting stunned, maybe go Brine King or something like that. But yeah, those are the 2 choices I made on my build, and yeah. As for leveling, I leveled with Stormblast Mine in the beginning, and then with a Frost Bomb, and I leveled with those 2 skills until I got Blade Vortex, and then I just converted and used Blade Vortex up until you stop playing the build. So I don't really have like a tried and true method I follow every time, or whatever's easiest. Use whatever you want while leveling, as long as it'll get you there eventually. But I like to use skills as soon as they become available, even though it's not the best all the time. I like to use them as soon as they become available because it makes the game more fun, in my opinion. So I recommend following that advice if you want to have more fun with the build and you're like not worried about min-maxing the time that it takes you to level. So for other leveling tips, I grabbed two Toolborn's wands while leveling. This is actually really helpful because it gives us power charges pretty frequently. So once you hit your first Ascendency and you put these two boys on, they give us a lot of bonus damage because it gives us a lot of cold damage, and it gives us easy generation of power charges, so we don't have to worry about using power charge and crit as much. So it just gives us a bunch of extra damage, and it's really nice. So I level with that, and then level with things obviously like Tabula Rasa and other items. But yeah, just those were my few leveling tips. Other things to level with that are helpful, obviously Wanderlust shoes. Using Hrimsorrow gloves is actually pretty nice to level with because it gives you Fizz to cold, and then you can scale the cold pretty easily from your tree and other gems. So it just kind of helps out in that way too. And yeah, those are my recommendations for leveling. If you really are struggling while leveling, which I don't think anyone should be on this build because it's pretty simple, then go ahead and send me comments or questions down below, and I can take a look at what you're currently using PoB and maybe help you out there. But yeah, leveling with Stormblast Mine until I get to Blade Vortex is usually leveling with Stormblast Mine is my usual way of leveling until I get to the skill I want to use. Or leveling with Arc. Using Arc is also a really good option to use while leveling because Arc is just such a smooth and easy skill to use while leveling, and it does a ton of damage, helps with clearing really well, and it can do bossing pretty well. So yeah, that's it I had for my tips. That's pretty much it for the build, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this build. I hope you guys will enjoy this build if you're watching this video. Hopefully you give it a try or take a look at it. This build is actually really fun. I had a lot of fun with it this league. I made most of my currency off this build. I league started with Volatile Dead Spellslinger. Hope you guys checked out that video. Once I got a little bit of currency, I brought a 6-link Shavs and a Void battery, and then just got to work on this build, and then this build made me a ton of currency, really good at heisting actually, and it can clear all content. So I just had a really good time this league with this build, and I hope you guys try out this build sometime in the future. I'm sure this build will be usable in future leagues, so go ahead and try it out if you enjoyed it. If you enjoy Herald of Ice pops and stuff like that, it's going to be a great build for you. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I had to say. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys have a great time, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.